Good day, class. So today I will be talking about topic 7, capacity planning. So before we proceed with our topic, let us first have our desired learning outcomes. So first is to understand capacity strategies, and next is to distinguish between design capacity and effective capacity. In operations management, we define capacity as the upper limit or the maximum amount of work, or in other words, the ceiling on the load that an operating unit can handle. According to the authors Stevenson and Cachon, it is the art of balancing what you can do or the supply with what customers want or simply the demand. Now let us further understand what capacity is. Think of it as the physical size of a container. You cannot pour 2 liters of water into a 1-liter bottle without changing the bottle first. We expect it to overflow, right? Of course. Or think of it like a smartphone's battery or a restaurant seating. If it is too small, you lose customers. If it is too big, you waste money on space that you do not use. Capacity as the physical limit or the ceiling. Let's look at a high-speed EV battery plant that's designed to produce 1,000 packs per day. Remember, it only produces 1,000 packs per day. Now the constraint is, if a manufacturer asks for 1,200 packs tomorrow, the manager must say no or wait, because the ceiling is determined by either the slowest machine or the available robots. Now let's move on to capacity as a strategic asset. High ceiling also pertains to having excess capacity. In modern OM, capacity is also used as a competitive weapon. If your competitor can only offer 1,000 units, but your plant can do 1,500, then you can cater the extra customers who are looking for a capacity of 1,500 units. Now, we also know that the cost efficiencies varies in your output versus your capacity. While a high ceiling is good for speed, producing only 500 units or packs with a 1,000 capacity plant means a rise on unit cost because your expenses such as electricity, rent, and machineries that are not being fully utilized. And lastly, we have here capacity as the ceiling in modern scenarios. In today's tech-driven world, the ceiling isn't just about floor space. It is also about digital and labor capacity. For companies to raise their ceiling, given that they've reached their maximum capacity, companies might need to invest in millions in a processing unit or hire a whole new night shift employee. Now, the question is, why shouldn't we run at 100% capacity all the time? Doing so leads to machine breakdowns and employee burnout, which actually lowers the ceiling over time due to wear and tear. We use different units to measure this ceiling, and managers must choose the unit of measure that best reflects their business's ability to generate value. We have here number one, output measures, or the finished goods approach. This is best used if the product is standardized and the work is repetitive. We will use it when the unit produced today is exactly the same as the unit produced tomorrow because it provides a clear physical count of success. Now we use this when product variety is high or for service-based operations like available labor hours or number of hospital beds. Next is input measures or the resources available approach. Inputs are necessary when the products or services are customized, complex, or service-oriented. We use this when one unit of output takes a different amount of effort every time. For example, in an IT firm, one app might take 100 hours, while another takes 5,000. Measuring in apps would be meaningless because it takes a different number of hours to produce an output. By measuring billable hours or labor days, the firm knows how much energy they have available to sell to clients, regardless of how complex the specific task is. Now we have here a comparison table on how you are going to measure your capacity. We have here on the first variable the business type. Next is the common measurement used and the type of measure. For business type, we have here oil refinery. Now your common measurement for that is barrels per day, and that is your output, which is standardized. Next is luxury hotel. Your common measurement for that is your available room per night. And your type of measurement is input because it is resource based. Now for retail store, we have your square footage or cashier hours. And your type of measure is input because it is also resource based. Now for pizza chain, we have here pizzas per hour. And your type of measure should be output because it is standardized. Now, how do we measure KPIs? This is a critical distinction for realistic planning. As you can see here, we have here the following formulas for utilization and efficiency. For utilization, that is equal to actual output divided by design capacity times 100. And for efficiency, that is actual output divided by effective capacity times 100. So let's look at the smart tablet factory example. It says here design capacity is the maximum theoretical output under ideal conditions. For example, you are producing 1,000 tablets per day if you are running or if your factory is running 24/7 with no breaks. Now, your effective capacity is the design capacity minus the real-world constraints like maintenance, lunch breaks, and setups. So, for example, you are only producing 800 tablets per day. Now, your actual output is also different from your effective capacity. Actual output refers to what was actually produced, which is, for example, you produce 720 tablets due to a power glitch or any technical problem that might have occurred during your production. So let us find out our utilization rate. Again, it is a measure of how much of our expensive ceiling is being filled. So again, the formula for that is actual output divided by design capacity times 100%. And your actual output was 720 divided by your design capacity, which is 1,000 tablet, times 100%, so your utilization rate is 72%. Now, if we are going to interpret that, it says here the factory is only using 72% of what the machines are physically doing. This might suggest there is room to grow if demand increases. And to find out our efficiency, our formula again is efficiency is equal to actual output divided by effective capacity times 100%. And the given numbers are actual output was 720 and your effective capacity was 800. That's times 100%. So that is equal to 90%. Okay. So this tells us how well we performed against our realistic goal. Even though we only use 72% of our dream goal, hitting 90% efficiency tells the manager the team is actually performing quite well despite the power glitch. So again, we have here our summary table for our metric, which was utilization and efficiency. In the calculation, we had 720 for utilization, 720 divided by 1,000, and your result was 72%. And the meaning of it is how much of the total building and machines were used. Now for efficiency, we have here 720 divided by 800, your effective capacity, and the result was 90%. It says here how well we did given the reality of the workday. So we have here a recap of the design and effective capacities. So again, the following features are definition, factors included, and purpose. For design capacity, the definition is the maximum theoretical under ideal conditions. So this is what is written in the manual of your machineries. And now for effective capacity, this is design capacity minus allowances for real-world constraints. So we have here the breaks, maintenance, setup. Okay, so that's for effective capacity. Now, the factors included here are theoretical limits, 24/7 operation, no breakdown. So it's like a perfect scenario. While in effective capacity, we have here maintenance, lunch breaks, personal time, and the shift changes. Those are the variables under the effective capacity. Now, the purpose is for design capacity, it is used as a benchmark for system potential. And for effective capacity, this is used for realistic scheduling and daily planning. So this is like the expectation versus reality thing. We have a scenario here where a commercial bakery has a bread baking machine. Now in the design capacity, it is rated by the manufacturer to bake 100 loaves per hour if it runs nonstop 24 hours a day. So that will give them 2,400 loaves per day. But in reality, the bakery needs 2 hours for cleaning, 1 hour for maintenance, and 1 hour for dough changeover. So therefore, the bakery only plans for 20 hours of production that will give them 2,000 loaves per day. And that is the effective capacity. Effective capacity is influenced by several operational factors. And we have here one, facility, referring to the physical environment, which pertains to dictating how smoothly work flows. Under it are the design and layout. This is the configuration and physical arrangement of a workspace, significantly impacting productivity. For instance, a congested factory floor or poorly placed tools force employees to spend valuable time moving around. This is unnecessary travel time, directly reduces your overall operational capacity. Next is the environment. This is the working conditions within a facility which plays a major role in its effective capacity. For example, if a warehouse has excessive heat or inadequate lighting, employees will experience fatigue much more quickly, and this will drop in worker stamina, directly leads to a slower rate of production and overall output. For product and service factors, it is the nature of what a company produces that significantly impacts its capacity. Essentially, the more specialized or unique a task becomes, the more resources it exhausts. Under it are standardization and customization. Standardization or high capacity is when products are uniform. Efficiency is maximized. For instance, a fast food restaurant that only prepares a single type of burger can produce 100 units hourly. Now for customization or the lower capacity, personalized services or products require more time and focus. A gourmet kitchen, for example, offering build your own meals, might only manage 20 units per hour because each unique order demands specific, varied steps. Thirdly, we have here process factors, which refers to the technical rules or operational requirements that governs a production line. These factors includes quality control and bottlenecks. Quality control is the rigorous testing that can slow down your production. For example, if an inspector must pull every 10th item for a 5-minute check, the overall hourly capacity will definitely decrease. Now for bottlenecks, this is a system's total output is being restricted by its most constrained resource. Even if you have a high-speed oven, if the chef preparing the food is slow, your entire capacity is limited to the chef's speed because a system is only as fast as its slowest link. And lastly, we have here human factors. Human factors acknowledge that the people executing tasks are not mechanical. Their individual differences and behaviors directly impact the ceiling of what can be accomplished. Under it are training and morale. For training, professional experience significantly alters speed. For instance, a veteran barista can prepare a latte in just 30 seconds, whereas a new trainee might require 3 minutes. And for morale, this is the psychological state of the workforce mattering. Poor motivation or high rates of absenteeism decrease the total hours of labor available, which in turn reduces the effective capacity for that period. So this is definitely the last one, policy factors. Policy factors are the internal rules set by management that can inadvertently restrict total output. And this includes safety regulations and scheduling. For safety regulations, these are guidelines designed to protect employees, such as requiring a machine to cool down for 30 minutes after every 4 hours of use, safeguarding the workforce, but this leads to a reduction in daily production. For scheduling, this can be corporate mandates, like prohibiting weekend labor or enforcing rigid no overtime policies. This places a hard limit on the amount of work a business can complete within a week. Now, this section focuses on the big picture, also known as the long-term strategic capacity planning, because these decisions require massive financial investments and years to execute. They are nearly impossible and extremely costly to reverse once finalized. Its focus is aligning the organization's overall scale with predicted market demand and growth for the next 2 to 10 years. Its key decisions are major capital expenditures, such as acquiring land, constructing new production facilities, or investing in large-scale specialized robotics. As an example, consider Tesla's gigafactories. In 2024 to 2025, they didn't just increase their workload. They built massive factories across the globe to handle the demand expected by 2030. The risk is that if market interest shifts away from EVs, the company is left with a billion-dollar asset that is difficult to repurpose. For short-term or tactical capacity planning, this centers on flexibility. This decision addresses immediate operational challenges such as sudden holiday demand or equipment failure on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Its focus is modifying your current resources to effectively manage temporary spikes or dips in customer demand. The key techniques here are overtime or extra shifts, subcontracting or outsourcing, and adjusting processing rates. For overtime or extra shifts, this is expanding work hours for existing staff to meet a surge. For subcontracting or outsourcing, this is hiring external partners to handle temporary overflow. And for adjusting processing rates, this is temporarily speeding up or simplifying assembly processes to increase throughput. So to summarize, we have here the comparison table for long-term and short-term capacity planning with the following variables such as time frame, cost, examples, and reversibility. For long-term strategic, the time frame is 2 to 10 years, while in the short term or the tactical one, this is days, weeks, or months. For the cost, long-term, it's very high, which is in millions, and for short term, this is low, which pertains to wages and contract fees. And an example for long-term strategic is building a new hospital wing. And for short term, it's hiring on-call nurses for a flu outbreak. So it's like a job contract. For reversibility, for long term, this is very hard to undo or it's permanent. For short term, it's easy to undo. You just have to stop the overtime. Now, developing a robust customer connections goes further than just one-on-one interactions. It requires fostering internal partnerships across all company departments to provide a seamless, uniform experience. Simultaneously, organizations must build external partnerships with stakeholders like suppliers and distributors to form a value delivery network. This coordinated efforts across the entire supply chain also allows a business to better satisfy customer needs and sustain profitable long-term loyalty. And we have here partnership examples, which are internal and external partnerships. For internal, a retail brand where marketing, logistics, and customer support teams collaborate to ensure orders arrive on time and issues are resolved instantly. For external, a restaurant that works closely with local farmers for fresh ingredients and relies on third-party delivery services to expand its reach. Now, when we talk about value delivery network, it represents the integrated cooperation between a company, its suppliers, distributors, and customers to provide the highest possible value. By aligning every stage of the supply chain, businesses can significantly improve the final customer experience. For coordinated effort, superior value is delivered when all members of the network work in harmony. As a real-world example for this, a smartphone producer must synchronize with part suppliers and retail outlets to guarantee that products are high quality and available when customers want them. For designing the business portfolio, this is about a strategic process where management organizes a company's various products and divisions to optimize total growth and value. This involves identifying strategic business units or SBUs and evaluating their performance to determine whether to invest resources. So again, SBUs are distinct divisions or units within a company, each focusing on specific products or market. For example, the Jollibee Food Corporation having Greenwich, Chowking, Jollibee of course, and Red Ribbon. They have different target markets. Now, for portfolio analysis, it is the method of evaluating how each individual business unit or SBU is performing and what its future potential looks like. This analysis allows leadership to prioritize their investment effectively. A common tool used here is the BCG matrix, which categorizes business units into four types to guide resource allocation. We have stars, cash cows, question marks, and dogs. Now for stars, these are high growth, high market share units that require heavy investments. For cash cow, these are established units with high market share but low growth that generate cash used to support other SBUs. For question marks, these are high growth units with low market share that require careful decision making on whether to invest more or phase them out. For dogs, these are low growth, low share units that typically do not warrant significant investment. Now, by carefully assessing market opportunities, companies can implement specific growth strategies to ensure long-term success. For market penetration, boosting sales of current products with existing markets, such as coffee shop using loyalty discounts to keep customers coming back. For market development, bringing existing products into entirely new markets, like a clothing brand opening international stores. For product development, this is launching new products for your current customer base, such as tech company releasing a next generation smartphone. And for diversification, moving into completely new markets with new products, such as an automaker beginning to manufacture electric bikes. Now, marketing strategy refers to the core logic a business uses to generate customer value and establish profitable, lasting relationships. To put this strategy into action, companies must use the marketing mix or the 4Ps, a set of tactical tools designed to influence the market. Now we have here the real-world applications of the 4Ps. This presentation highlights how global leaders utilize these tools. For product, Apple focuses on high-end innovation, creating must-have devices like the iPhone and MacBook to offer a premium experience. For price, Starbucks applies a premium pricing strategy which signals high quality and reinforces its status as an upscale brand. For Place, Tesla maintains control over the customer relationship by selling directly through its own online platform and company-owned galleries rather than traditional dealerships. And lastly, for promotion, Coca-Cola utilizes massive global advertising campaigns and major event sponsorships to ensure its brand remains at the forefront of consumer awareness. And for the key takeaways, capacity planning is about finding the perfect balance, having enough resources to satisfy customers without wasting money on empty space or idle machines. We have here three main things to remember: real versus dream goals. So don't plan based on a perfect world or your design capacity. Instead, plan around reality, which you need to account for breaks and maintenance, which is your effective capacity, so you don't let customers down. More than just machines, a business limit is set by many things at once, including how the building is laid out, the variety of products made, slow steps in the process or your bottlenecks, and even worker happiness and training. And big plans versus quick fixes. Companies must make big, permanent bets on the future, like building new factories as strategic. At the same time, they need quick fixes like overtime or outsourcing to handle sudden busy periods, which is your tactical. And thank you very much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.